It is a miracle of history that we have a book like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Not only is this a guide to Stoicism and lets you see how Stoicism moved from ancient Greece to the Roman Empire, but it is also the journal of the Emperor of Rome. And it's interesting to think about how we could journal like Marcus Aurelius. And there are really 5 pieces of the puzzle, and it all starts with figuring out who you are. The Meditations is made up of notebooks. There are 12 of them in this book, and all of them are pretty similar to each other, except for one, and that's notebook 1. In that very first notebook, it actually kind of looks like Marcus is like gratitude journaling. He's writing about all of these things that he's thankful for, and he starts with his family, then he moves on to his friends and his teachers, and then he talks about all the ways he's been blessed by the gods. He mentions his healthy body, his strong sense of wanting to live in accordance with nature, and his ability to overcome temptations and to maintain self-control. Well, I think that Marcus is starting his journal with an account of who he is, because he's going to use this journal to talk about all of the different ways that he could improve. He's talking about the ways that he could live up to his principles, or he's finding his failures and then trying to determine how to overcome them. But if you're trying to think about how you could be better, you first need to understand who you are right now. And that's really the first piece of the puzzle. You take a personal inventory, you sort of figure out your story. Who are you and where do you come from? And only then are you able to figure out where you want to go. And that's a great first step. But if you really want to get the most out of journaling like Marcus Aurelius, you have to go further and start treating your journal like an extended conversation with yourself. I actually feel a little bit bad about reading this book sometimes. That's because it feels too intimate. This is like a very raw, direct look into the mind of Marcus Aurelius. In Notebook 2, there's this line where Marcus just tells himself to forget your books and don't let it upset you. That's not allowed. It's in the middle of a different discussion, but he just chastises himself. Forget your books. And it feels like such a raw and like kind of personal thing, because clearly, he's away from home, he's away from his library, and one thing that he really loves is his book collection. Even just that small little thing is a level of vulnerability that I can't imagine he was letting himself show in his day-to-day life. And you see this kind of everywhere in the Meditations. Marcus talking to himself and being honest. So maybe Marcus couldn't show his vulnerability or even let out these petty complaints to anyone that he knew, but he could do it in his journal. Marcus really was writing for himself. He wasn't writing for other people. And I think that's what we have to do as well when we're keeping a journal. Of course, a great irony is that this book has now been read by hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people. For the vast majority of us, our journals will always be private. And that means when we're journaling, we can actually afford to be honest with ourselves. We've started with who we are, and we've decided to be honest with ourselves and to have a prolonged conversation with ourselves in our journals. And the next step is that we need to think about the big and the small. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. But first, I need to tell you about today's sponsor, HelloFresh. Summer is over and school is about to start, and many of us are looking for those quick and easy meals, especially if they can save us time and money, and that's where HelloFresh comes in. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, and they have something for everyone. Each box is fully customizable based on your preferences, and they have pre-portioned ingredients so that you only pay for what you need. Some of those options include family-friendly, quick and easy, vegetarian. Basically, if you have some kind of special diet that you follow, or just some general preferences, HelloFresh is probably going to be able to accommodate your needs. You can adjust your delivery date, or if there's a week where you won't be home much and you won't be able to cook, you can pause your subscription. If you sign up for HelloFresh right now, you will get free breakfast for life. That means for every HelloFresh box that you receive, you will get 1 free breakfast meal included. And that sounds pretty good to me. There are a lot of things I want to think about in the morning, but breakfast is not one of them. So it's nice if you can make a tasty breakfast convenient as well. Click the link in the description or use my code and you will get 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life. That's 1 free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active for life if you're in the US. If you're outside of the US, the local discount will apply. Thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. And now let's talk about this next piece of the puzzle. So in Marcus's journal, he talks about big matters like God or the gods or living in accordance with nature. And he talks about all of these small grievances as well. People who are annoying him, the fact that he can't read his books when he wants to, the fact that he feels disturbed and needs to retreat to what's sometimes called the inner citadel. That's just the privacy of your own mind, where you can find peace no matter where you are. And I think being able to talk about both the big and the small is one of the reasons why this ends up being such a compelling read, because at times Marcus wants to talk about Stoic metaphysics. He wants to talk about the nature of the universe, but then he'll zoom in and think about himself in light of his place in the universe, not just as a Roman emperor, not just as a father, but as a human being and all of the frailty that comes with being a human being. I mean, the number of times that Marcus Aurelius just complains about people in his journal is pretty astounding. It's never an extended discussion, and it's usually followed up with him chastising himself and saying that he needs to learn to not be disturbed by them. But you can clearly see a man who's bothered by the people of Rome or all of these politicians that are often probably vying for more power and could see him as an enemy. Don't feel like you have to only focus on the big stuff because that's the important stuff. But also don't neglect the big stuff and focus on all of your small and petty grievances. When I'm journaling and I'm thinking about Marcus as my example, I try to strike a balance. And as you're thinking about all of those big themes, and especially all of those people around you, you have to keep this important lesson in mind. And this is a key part of Stoic thinking. And that is, you need to learn to focus on what you can control. This idea that you should separate the world into what you can control and what you can't control is sometimes called the dichotomy of control, and that actually comes directly from Epictetus. But this way of thinking is running throughout the Meditations. Focusing on what you can control actually allows you to avoid despairing over things that are out of your control, including how other people treat you or think of you or what they say. And also by focusing on what you can control, it lets you move from thinking into doing. Marcus is thinking about what he should be doing in these situations. He's not just thinking or even thinking about thinking. Here is a pet peeve of mine when people talk about Stoicism. There is a myth that says that Stoics are all about action. This is not true. The Stoics were philosophers. They spend a lot of their time thinking about the world. They set up schools of philosophy. But what is true is that the Stoics emphasize a kind of unity between the way you think about the world and the way that you go and live in the world. And so when they have a metaphysical view about what you can or can't control, they then take that view and apply it as practical advice in their own lives. And that is honestly the best and biggest lesson of Stoicism. If you read the Stoics and you decide that there is very little of value there and you wouldn't call yourself a Stoic and you don't even want to keep reading the Stoics, I think that's fine. It's not for everybody. But being able to focus on what you can control is, I think, a key lesson, and it is most heavily emphasized by the Stoics. And I think it's their great contribution to philosophy as a way of life. And one of the things that you are best able to control is your own mind. And Marcus has this kind of method that he uses in order to help him think about the world in the right sort of way. And the phrase that he uses is dying the mind. And that's the last piece of the puzzle. Marcus has these principles that he wants to live by. These are the tenets of Stoicism. And for you, some of those principles might change or vary based on your values. But what he does emphasize is that he wants to live up to his principles. And so he has to repeat them to himself early and often. The Meditations is actually kind of a repetitive read. And if a modern book editor were taking the Meditations, they would cut maybe 50% of the book because they would say, you've already said this part. You don't need to say it again. And as literature, that might be an important critique. But as a journal, that would be the exact wrong thing. As I look back at some of my old journals, which is not always fun, but I do it sometimes, I see myself repeating things over and over and over again. And I don't see this as a flaw of the way that I journal. In fact, after reading Marcus Aurelius, I see it as actually a real benefit. By repeating things, I'm able to remind myself about what I actually value. And then it sort of makes me more likely to think that way when it matters most. And if I'm just speculating about like what the big advantage of journaling is, I think that's it. Journaling doesn't really help you make sense of the whole world. It does help you make sense of yourself. And if you're looking for a way to do that, you could do a lot worse than following the model from Marcus Aurelius. All right, that's all I have for you. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you will like this video that's popping up right here. But I hope you got something out of this, and I will talk to you soon.